Contempt of Congress resolution against the Attorney General to the full House. A move Judiciary Committee Chairman Gerald Nadler says is a response to a constitutional crisis.
Now is the time of testing whether we can keep a republic or whether this republic is destined to change into a different, more tyrannical form of government.
A Justice Department spokesperson says the contempt resolution is politically motivated, accusing Democrats of walking away from negotiations and rejecting extraordinary efforts to provide Congress with a less redacted version of the special counsel's report.
Fox's Jared Halpern, the full House likely to vote on the contempt resolution. The Justice Department says the Attorney General is blocked by law from releasing those portions of the Mueller report that contain secret grand jury information. The president Wednesday night blasting Democrats in a rally in Panama City, Florida.
Instead of wasting time, energy, taxpayer dollars on partisan stunts and hoaxes and witch hunts, Democrats should be focused on building up our country.
He pledged more than $400 million in federal aid to help that area rebuild from last year's devastating Hurricane Michael. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has canceled plans for a stop in Greenland en route home from his European trip, instead heading back to Washington to deal with new tensions with the Iranians. Secretary Pompeo also warning Great Britain not to use China's Huawei technology in the country's new cellular networks, telling Sky News the U.S. can't trust Huawei.
The United States, for its part, will only participate in trusted networks. We will only share America's information with those networks that we are confident aren't under the control of China.
This is Fox News.
Let's see now. Fast, easy, affordable. That's the best way to describe my home loan at Bank Pacific. Fast, because we give quick decisions. Easy, because we've cut back on the paperwork. Affordable, because today's home loan rates are still so low. So see us today to refinance or consolidate, or to buy or build your new home and save yourself some money.
Bank Pacific, where others put branches, we place roots.
Equal housing lender, member FDIC. Viva Bank Pacific.
Get a Coke 12-pack for only $3.49 when you fuel up on $35 or more of premium high-performance fuel. Conditions apply. See stores for details. Circle K. Take it easy. Get a dozen extra-large eggs for only 49 cents when you fuel up on $35 or more of premium high-performance fuel. Conditions apply. See stores for details. Circle K. Take it easy. Get a case of Circle K water for only $2.99 when you fuel up on $35 or more of premium high-performance fuel. Conditions apply. See stores for details. Circle K. Take it easy.
Just a day after the deadly shooting at a Colorado STEM school, stories of bravery emerging.
Brendan Biley says what will stand out more to him than the shooters who invaded his school are the heroes.
Two regular high school kids, two really awesome people, jump into action without any hesitation, and I was more than lucky to join them.
Brendan helped subdue one of the shooters but lost a friend, Kendrick Castillo. Biley says Castillo may be physically gone, but with a smile adds,
I know he will be with me for the rest of my life.
Biley says going back to the school won't scare him. He says this experience taught him
I will be able to act when I need to act,
no matter the danger. Gernal Scott, Fox News.
Nation struggling to keep alive. The deal meant to keep Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, now urging Tehran to back off the threat to resume higher enrichment of uranium. Russia and China accusing the U.S. of backing the Islamic Republic into a corner with Washington's unilateral withdrawal from the 2015 nuclear accord that promises Iran economic incentives in exchange for restrictions on its nuclear activities. The president withdrew the United States from that deal a year ago. A New Jersey homeless man has been indicted for his part in what had been a feel-good story that was revealed to be a scam.
39-year-old Mark D'Amico of Florence, New Jersey, indicted on 6 separate charges related to the scheme. Authorities say D'Amico, his now former girlfriend Caitlin McClure, and homeless man Johnny Bobbitt made up the story that Bobbitt rescued McClure to enrich themselves through GoFundMe. Bobbitt and Caitlin McClure pled guilty in exchange for their cooperation with authorities. She must serve 4 years in state prison and help repay the $400,000. Bobbitt was sentenced to 5 years probation for his role in the scheme. Lisa Lacera, Fox News.
Asian stocks trading lower. Dow futures are down more than 100 points. I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
Travel the world and then some with the 2 million United Miles sweepstakes from First Hawaiian Bank. Enter and you could win the grand prize of 1 million miles or be one of 6 other lucky winners. The world is big. Our prize is bigger. Enter at fhb.com/2 million miles. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. Sweepstake starts on May 1st and ends June 30th, 2019. Open to legal residents of Guam and CNMI. Ages 18 years or older. Visit 2millionmiles.com for official rules. First Hawaiian Bank. Member FDIC. Equal housing lender.
GRMC's Neuroscience and Neurology Department treats a wide spectrum of disorders associated with the nervous system, spine, and brain. Some of the more common disorders include seizures, epilepsy, dementia, sleep disorders, migraine, and stroke, which is one of the leading causes of death on Guam. GRMC's neuroscience team is equipped with the latest technology and the finest neurological doctors. To make an appointment, contact GRMC Specialty Clinics at 645-5500.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, although the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, a certain degree of responsibility goes with owning a firearm. As an example, you're not supposed to take a firearm onto public school property. And that brings me to today's little piece, which is semi-traditional here on Tall Tales as a part of the Second Amendment introduction to the show. And I'm referring to an article that appeared in the Post on the 7th of May. It's titled, School Employee Owned Gun Stolen from Truck. A Guam Department of Education employee who owned the guns reported stolen at Southern High on Thursday was placed on administrative leave. This is how this story should read. A Guam Department of Education employee who owned the gun reported stolen at Southern High on Thursday was arrested. This administrative leave thing, what that means is that the guy gets, the guy. How do I know it's a guy? I don't know if it's a guy or it's a girl. So what should I refer to that person as? Real Joe Cruz?
They, sir?
Absolutely. A government of Guam employee, a Department of Education employee owned the gun, reported stolen at Southern High on Thursday, was placed on administrative leave. Administrative leave means that they, even though it's only one person, gets to stay home and watch TV or play baseball or go to the beach or whatever and draw full pay during that time. That's what administrative leave means. It's, at the very minimum, a waste of money. At the maximum, it impinges upon the whole disciplinary process because we're all too familiar with the so-called 60-day rule. And let me posit this case. If there's enough information to say, we're going to put this guy on administrative leave because we got to do an investigation, the 60-day clock has already started to run. And you'll remember a person named, what is his name down at the port? Jojo, the former controller who got reinstated and is entitled to $600,000 back pay now, according to the news. There was never a determination of whether or not he had committed the misconduct that caused his initial termination. The only determination that was made was that apparently Mary Torres knew about the misconduct 62 days before JoJo was fired. And that's enough to say that's a bad bust. You got to reinstate the guy. You got to give him back pay. He also gets to recover his attorney's fees and costs. So the story that says he was placed on administrative leave doesn't look right at all. The incident resulted in the school being on a brief lockdown and a 17-year-old student being charged. We have identified the employee who owns the firearm, and that employee has been placed on administrative leave pending completion of our investigation, said GDOE spokesperson Isa Baza. The employee has not been identified. Now, once again, if he's been identified and there's enough information to put him on administrative leave, I'm just wondering why the cops haven't arrested him. And then the story goes on to name the student, that he was charged with a second-degree felony possession of a firearm, that he was 17, meaning he's a minor, that he didn't have a firearms ID, etc., that the weapon stolen was a Smith & Wesson .357 revolver. And going on to the gun owner, court documents indicate that two school employees reported to police. Court documents. I wonder what court documents those would be. Two school employees reported that their pickup trucks had been burglarized. The Guam Post reached out. Oh, I'm touched. The Guam Post reached out to one of those employees. They didn't just call him up, right? Excuse me. They didn't just call them up. They reached out. Yeah. To one of the teachers named in the court complaint. I'm not obligated right now to divulge that the investigation is complete, the GDOE employee said. Well, Guam Post, you know what the guy's name is because you got it probably out of the magistrate's complaint that dealt with the 17-year-old that was busted. The Guam's Gun-Free School Zone Act of 2004 prohibits anyone from bringing a gun onto a school campus. When asked about the owner of the gun, Guam Police Department spokesman Paul Tapau would only say the case remains under investigation. Now, the thing that brought this back to my attention was that I was listening to the Ray Gibson show this morning. Nothing unusual about that. If you don't start your day that way, it's a really good way to start your day. Set your dial to 93.3 in the morning. It's before 6 a.m., and you needn't touch it again because you get everything you're going to possibly want to listen to is right here on 93.3. So I was listening to Ray this morning, and he had a telephone interview with Sergeant Paul Tapau, spokesman for the Guam Police Department. And at first, I couldn't believe my ears. I'm wondering, why is Joey Duenas talking about this criminal case? Yeah, well, when I heard all that verbal tap dancing, I thought it was, again, Joey Duenas doing his Fred Astaire imitation. But it wasn't. It was Paul Tapau. So if Paul Tapau were ever looking for a position on a border commission, I think he'd fit right in on the CCU, because on Ray's show this morning, he tap danced just as well as Joey Duenas did on the matter of the illegal salary increases. So Paul Tapau kept referring to, well, we've got to protect that employee's due process. Well, I'm going to cheat a little bit here, and I'm going to read the due process clause out loud, and maybe somebody out there can you give the signal for people to take out their Law and Order notebooks, Real Joe Cruz? Yeah. This is the due process clause that applies to us. It's part of the 14th Amendment of the United States. It's applied to us living here in the territory of Guam by the Organic Act. And this is what it says. No state, and in our case, no territory, shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Okay, so if the person that had stolen, as you were the owner of the firearm, who obviously broke the law by driving it on campus and perhaps broke other provisions of the law because the firearm wasn't properly secured, if that person were arrested for violating those laws, does that deprive him of his life without due process of law? No. Does it deprive him of his liberty without due process of law? Well, if he's arrested, it might deprive him of his liberty, because we might see that you have a right to remain silent. Anything you say can and be used against you, etc., as somebody slaps the cuffs on him. But that is due process of law. Does it deprive him of his property? Well, he already lost his property when he left it in the truck and the kid stole it. And I suppose his property is now in the evidence locker at the police department. So there is a due process clause in the Constitution, but repeated recital of the due process clause is, in this particular case, was only verbal tap dancing. Sergeant Paul Tapau also referenced, well, we've got to protect the employee's employment rights. Well, it's not the cop's job. The arrest and the discipline that the school district or the public schools lay on the employee, if any, are two totally different things. It can even go this way. If an employee is charged with a crime, in other words, if he were arrested and a magistrate's complaint were filed, that employee has a responsibility to notify his director that he's been charged with a crime. And, of course, the criminal law process runs its course. Well, let's say that the employee is charged with a crime. The Department of Education does its investigation, said, yeah, you violated the law, you violated our policy, you put a student in danger, you're fired. Pack up and get out of here. And the employee then goes on trial, into a criminal trial, and let's say he's acquitted by a jury. He gets his job back, right? No, he doesn't. He does not get his job back. Those two separate procedures, run on separate tracks. So I'm really, really disappointed in the way the police department has handled this. We got a new chief, and my old Aunt Florence, God bless her, may she rest in peace, was always fond of saying, a new broom sweeps the cleanest. Sometimes you bring in a new boss, and he gets things moving. Well, unless a later revelation shows me to be dead wrong, because this is far more complicated than my feeble brain could comprehend from what I read in the paper. This new broom is just sitting in the corner, and it ain't sweeping nothing. We are, of course, proponents of firearms here on Tall Tales. We recite the Second Amendment every day as almost as though it were the opening prayer for the show, because we value it so highly. But when things like this happen, it has a deleterious effect on everyone's Second Amendment rights, because the suspicion is that, well, there's no way we can keep people from bringing guns onto campus, from keeping the guns out of the hands of students. So the only thing we can do is just not have any guns at all. And how many times have I read stuff from the national press that takes that tack? Well, let's see what... did you open the Tom lines?
The Francis lines are open.
The Francis line is open. Good afternoon, Francis.
Good afternoon. You're talking about due process, and you talking about how it is, how it's protected. In other words, Is this under the Fifth Amendment ratified, something like that? We're designed to protect people from unfair and unreasonable treatment by others?
Well, it is in the 14th and the Fifth Amendment, and its purpose is to protect people's life, liberty, or property with the requirement that no one be deprived of any of those things unless by due process of law.
So the 14th Amendment contains what you mentioned, due process clause that is intended to limit the government or state government's power or something like that?
It's what I would call a negative right. It tells you something that the government can't do. The government cannot deprive you of your life, liberty, or property without due process of law.
All right. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, life, liberty, property, without due process of law, I guess you're right.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm a new student here. I'm a sophomore, so got my book out, and I'm on lesson 27 right now, following you.
Well, you're in the right place, Francis.
All right, we'll be listening.
Okay. Thanks for calling.
Take my call. Thank you.
Come on. So open up the Tom lines. I noticed when I checked Facebook, I think I got 3 Toms on Facebook already. So I'm going to probably pick this up again tomorrow because this is just unsatisfactory, and it has a deleterious effect on everybody's Second Amendment rights because it appears that either the government is powerless to do anything in a situation where a gun finds its way on campus, or possibly that somebody doesn't care, or even worse, there's some chicanery involved, that we enforce the law against everybody except, well, not them, because they are this, that, or the other thing. And I certainly hope that's not the case. So let's see, I got, okay, the Tom lines are open. I've got the real Tom on the line. Good afternoon, real Tom.
Good afternoon, sir. I think the intent of the Department of Education was to, when they put this, or they, whoever it is, that brought that weapon on campus, putting him or her on leave, away from the school, away from the students that were involved in finding that weapon and stealing it from his vehicle. Maybe that was their intent of putting him or her on leave to keep him away from the students that were accused of stealing the weapon from him. Maybe that's the intent, that they want to keep him away while the investigation is going on.
Let me tell you this, Tom.
They don't want to put him on leave without pay because the presumption of innocence is still there.
No, Tom, there's no presumption of innocence. If a person is in a criminal trial, there's a presumption of innocence. But I've been through this one before. I'll give you the example. Let's say that I run a small store and I've got a cashier, and my cash register comes up 25 or 30 bucks short every day, and I do a really accurate count. And I tell you, Tom, I'm 25 or 30 bucks short every day. I think this cashier is stealing money from me. I think I'll fire him. And you say, well, wait a minute. He's innocent until he's proven guilty. No, he's not. So in a situation like this, Tom, the adverse action rules allow the department to put him on immediate suspension in a situation like this. So he's on suspension. He doesn't get paid. He can't come back to school. The investigation continues. Now, of course, you've got to interview him as part of your investigation. But so often this administrative leave is just a way of kind of letting the time go by. I remember in the case of John Fernandez, when he was so-called administrative leave, he earned, at one time, I ran a running total on it when Tall Tales was on a different radio station, and he was up to like $75,000 or $80,000 worth of pay, and he wasn't even coming to work. So this administrative leave thing tends to be an abuse.
I was thinking in terms of supposing the guy is accused that was his vehicle that the weapon was in. And so he, in a way, he is claiming that that's not his vehicle, that's not his weapon. So why is he being singled out? That's where I was thinking that maybe he's innocent. Maybe that vehicle don't belong to him. Maybe that weapon did not belong to him.
I suppose it's possible, but according to the news stories, the owners of the vehicles turned the cars in as broken into, and that's how they identified him. And according to the story that I read today, they know who the person is that owned the truck. So, you know, I mean, if we're going to kind of allow our suspicious minds to wander, maybe the owner of the truck was the principal, and maybe the principal didn't want to suspend themselves. You know what I mean, Tom?
That's true. But remember that the people that wrote that article in the newspaper could be wrong. We're all humans. Like, supposing somebody claimed that was my vehicle, that I drove that vehicle on campus and the weapon was in my vehicle, and then I would say, that's not my vehicle. I own a Jeep, but that's not my Jeep.
Well, then the thing to do is to find these things out, not to drag it out with this administrative leave. Well, we'll put him on administrative leave and waste a lot of time here, even though we know people are. When you talk about guns in schools, given all the disasters that have happened in the last 20 years, people get very nervous, and a patient approach signaled by putting somebody on 15 days leave with pay, you know, where you try to figure out what happened, and you know who the person was that owned the truck, doesn't give me much comfort, Tom. That's not what I expect from public officials.
Yeah, I know, but what bugs me is that who started that 60-day rule anyway? Is that a local law that we made?
It is
national law.
No, it's a local statute, and I remember when it was put in place, and the reason it was put in place was, once again, politics. There was an employee at one of the departments who was on the wrong political side of things, and when the administration changed, that person was fired for something that had happened 11 months earlier during the previous administration. So the remedy for that was the 60-day rule, which is a real problem because what it amounts to is that management only has really 40 days to make its decision. So one of three things happened because of that rule. First, management is forced, in some cases, to make decisions prematurely. Second, management doesn't make a decision on time and the 60 days runs. Or third, too many resources have to be devoted to handling these employee investigations. And that's especially true in police, fire, and corrections, which is where most of the disciplinary action comes from.
I was thinking in terms of in defense of the accused. So, you know, if somebody accused me that that's my vehicle and that's my weapon, you know, what if it's not? And they're going to put me on suspension without pay or leave without pay while they're investigating whether it's true that might not be my vehicle. By the time they found out that I'm really innocent, that's not my vehicle, that's not my gun. In the meantime, I have no salary to continue paying my bills and feeding my children.
Well, Tom, what I'm talking about here assumes a degree of competence on the part of management, that you know that management would not put someone on immediate in order to put someone on immediate suspension. You have to do it in order to prevent that same kind of occurrence happening again. And obviously, you'd have to have your proofs in line, because that's going to go before the Civil Service Commission. You could probably hypothesize all kinds of situations, but that's not what managers deal with. They're dealing with the real world. And if they know who the person was that owned the truck, they've zeroed it down to that, and they haven't taken any action, I want to know why. Putting someone on administrative leave is not taking action.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. All right, Bob, I'll let other people chime in on this issue.
Well, I'm glad you called in, Tom. You got the Tom line opened up anyhow.
All right.
So, see, I saw something here. Peeking out of the corner of my eye here, I saw something was pretty good. I'll come back after the break here and take a look at it.
2-for-1 dinner time is back at Ruby Tuesday Guam. That's 2 fresh garden bars, 2 tasty entrees, and a sweet dessert to share for just $25.99. 2-for-1 dinner time for a limited time at Ruby Tuesday Guam.
It's important to have claims process that works for you. At Guahan Insurance Services, we make things simple and convenient. Same door you walk in to purchase your insurance is the same door you open to file your claim. We can't pretend that the car insurance claims process is fun, but we can promise a hassle-free and speedy recovery without any runarounds. For your home, auto, and business insurance, visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center on Marine Corps Drive in Tamuning. Don't forget to like us on Facebook or give us a call at 475-1162 or text 929-SAVE. That's 929-7283.
Now, more Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie. Spitting truth like watermelon seeds at a summer picnic. Call now, 888-TALK, 888-8255.
You know, Real Joe Cruz, one of the rules here on Tall Tales is that we are an issue-oriented talk show. We invite people to call in. You can call in and say, Bob, you don't know what you're talking about. We expect people to post things on Facebook, but one of the things that the rules say you're not supposed to do is pin the tail on the talk show host.
Really?
Yeah. Did you ever play pin the tail on the donkey when you were a kid?
Yeah, you get blindfolded and you just try to pin the tail in the right place.
You got this cardboard tail with a pin in it, right? And you're blindfolded and you try to stick that pin in the board.
Yeah.
Yeah, pin the tail on the donkey. Well, you're not supposed to be playing pin the tail on the talk show host. But we've got this group here called the Triple J Rangers.
Oh.
Yeah. And I think that their emblem looks like a donkey tail with a pin sticking out of it. Because here's what another Joe Cruz says. This is not you now. This is another Joe Cruz. A guy can't even go on administrative leave in the comfort of his own home without Bob blowing a gasket and all the salt leaking out.
There you go.
The Triple J Rangers. Yeah. Okay, so I'm probably going to come back with this tomorrow, and I will make sure you have your Law and Order notebooks tomorrow, because I will go through the firearms laws on Guam as they apply to this. Okay, so we finished that, and from there we go to... Zami Ikotny. Zami Ikotny gefinu English nai. Press the meat. But Meet the Press. It's a regular feature here of Programata. Programata. Yeah, so starting out here with the Daily News, and wonder of wonders, the Daily News wrote their own editorial today. Yeah. I don't know if they had a bad internet connection back with the Gannett, or, there's all is not peace and harmony in Gannett land either, which I'll get to when we get to the card. So this is the editorial. Our view, expedite hiring of a new chief medical examiner. This community needs its elected officials to prioritize the hiring of a new chief medical examiner and get the position filled quickly. Dr. Aurelio Espinola retired after 20-plus years on the job at the end of January. Since 2018, the government has known Espinola planned to retire, but the Commission on Post-Mortem Examinations has yet to find and hire a permanent replacement. Dr. Philip Dauterman, a Saipan-based pathologist who has been doing some post-mortem exams and autopsies for the last several months, said he was not told to do any more work because the Office of Chief Medical Examiner ran out of money. Wow. I'd probably be able to tie this into the story about how much money the new administration has spent on travel. Yeah. I suppose we could call up the chief of staff, Governor Leon Guerrero's chief of staff, and ask him about money for this. Yeah, but he's probably off island. Dauterman was on Guam last week and did 15 post-mortem examinations, but on Friday, the medical examiner's office told him the money to pay him had been exhausted. Dauterman left for home even though more examinations still had to be done. Wow. Funeral homes have said the lack of a medical examiner impacts their clients. I wonder how they know. Grieving families often endure long waits, 10 days to 2 weeks instead of 2 or 3 days. The lack of a forensic pathologist led Guam to contract 2 Hawaii pathologists for homicides and suspicious deaths, which has led to long delays in autopsies relating to crimes. It's unclear where the money will come from to pay for their continued work. I guess maybe they could bring in Kathy Kokigi from the Solid Waste Commission to help them figure out how to do that. The lack of a chief medical officer jeopardizes police criminal investigations as well as the prosecution of crimes. This isn't an open position that can sit empty for long. It's critical to public safety on our island and to not further complicate the deaths of loved ones by causing unnecessary stress on families. We need the governor and senators to step up and to act to fill the position quickly. If that means Governor Leon Guerrero needs to declare a state of emergency, and senators need to increase the salary and benefits to attract a suitable candidate, then so be it. Elected officials need to immediately find a funding source for the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner so it can make use of the services of Dauterman and the contracted Hawaii pathologists. Well, you know, the other Governor, Leon Guerrero, would tell you we must have plenty of money because there's a provision in the budget to do a new stage study to give government employees a raise. And we all know that that the governor, in effect, gave a $100,000 raise to the unclassified employees at the Election Commission, even though there isn't going to be an election until a year from this August. And we know that there has been a lot of travel going on from out of the governor's office. So it would appear at first glance that we have plenty of money. Perhaps the mayor's council could help us out here since they gave Angel Sablon a $17,000 raise to $98,000 a year. So when the fans, the people out here in the bleachers, see all of this money being spent, it's hard for them to get their heads wrapped around the idea that we can't afford a critical position in our criminal justice system like a chief medical examiner because we ain't got no money. That's the Daily News. Well, I'll give them this. I'm not going to tip my hand on the coveted Blue Star, but I will say this. Daily News is in the running. They actually wrote their own editorial today. Okay, and then we go to the Post. Overwhelmed agencies that deal with convicts need support. Now, that's a word that you don't hear much anymore in the politically correct 21st century. Convicts, right? We're supposed to refer to people who are incarcerated as clients or former clients, etc., not convicts. So, one of the realities that became apparent following a recent legislative hearing on convicted sex offenders who preyed on children is the lack of money and expertise needed to protect the public from the release of such criminals once they're released from prison. Adding another layer to the challenges for the people in the government of Guam who are our public safety first line of defenses is the lack of coordinated efforts to try to ensure that criminals do not prey on more victims after they're no longer behind bars. At the legislative hearing Monday conducted by the Legislative Committee on Justice, Department of Corrections social worker Mark Paris said the Guam Parole Board often requests psychological evaluations, but it doesn't always receive one because of the workload of DOC's solo clinical psychologist. The inmate population at DOC has ballooned in the last several years, Paris said, so one psychologist for over 600 to 800 clients is a lot of work. That number's wrong. I think there are between 600 and 800 people behind bars out there at the Crossbar Hotel in Manilo, but the majority of them are pretrial detainees. They're not inmates. They're not clients. And for people in the business, it's really important to make that distinction because you're dealing with two totally different things. We don't know where Mark Paris lives. We know that he's a social worker. It would be unrealistic for the community, elected officials, and others in charge of public policy to expect one psychologist to do all of this work. This issue has persisted, but it's not the public's full view until a spotlight shone on it as a result of the recent arrest of Paul Santos Mafnes, Jr., who has gotten more publicity here recently than Mike Lindell, the My Pillow guy. Paul Santos Mafnes Jr., who stands charged in the alleged kidnap and rape case involving a 10-year-old girl as she waited for her school bus. Mafnes had prior convictions in what authorities have called a serial kidnapping and raping of 3 teenage girls in the 90s. He received an early release from prison without he didn't receive an early release. He was put on parole. You gotta be precise here when you're talking about these things, Post. Without a psychological evaluation and without the chemical castration required by law? No, not required by law, allowed by law. Is the Tom line open?
It's open, sir.
Yeah, I'm surprised. I'm surprised I'm not looking over here and seeing a light go on. DOC Director Samantha Brennan acknowledged in the same hearing that there has been no funding for the castration program, which became law in 2015, and no doctor is available on island who could do the chemical castration. Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness Center Director Therese Areola also said her agency does not have a sex offender rehabilitation program. Given all these challenges, the Guam Parole Board, Judiciary, Corrections Department, and Behavioral Health Center really need to better coordinate their efforts. It should also help the government of Guam to do a better job of handling the problem if it speeds up the identification of sex offenders and other convicts who should be turned over to the U.S. immigration authorities so they could be deported. I thought the Post took an editorial position in opposition to that. Maybe it was the Daily News. One of the two said, make them serve their whole term and then deport them. You remember that, real Joe Cruz?
Not distinctly who did.
Yeah. It's one thing for our justice system to be overwhelmed by prisoners and parolees whose home is Guam. It's another issue for Guam to be forced to continue to provide services to convicts who broke the law and must also by law be kicked out of here. Well, if they've finished serving their term, they're going to be kicked out of here. They're not going to go on parole. If they've committed a crime that's a deportable offense, they go home. Where the sticky part comes in is what Governor Calvo was doing. He was commuting sentences. So let's say an inmate had been sentenced to 20 years in prison, and he served 8 of his 20 years, and the governor commutes his term to 8 years, and therefore he's released. He's committed a deportable crime. The immigration folks are waiting for him at the door. They grab him. Well, they don't actually grab him. They let him stay there. But they pick up the feds pick up the tab until they're ready to put him on a plane and send him back where he came from. But the commutation was the key there. It's one thing for our justice system to be, if the government agencies in charge of dealing with these problems aren't overwhelmed by the massive number of convicts in our prison system, then we will be able to better focus on the resources they will be provided with for a smaller prisoner and parolee population. Yeah, well, deporting aliens who committed deportable offenses, that is not going to have any impact on the parolee population at all. It's true these agencies need more money to do their job right. It's also right to remove the burdens on the system that should no longer be Guam's problem to deal with. And I disagree with that. You know, we've talked about this before, but if a person who's not a United States citizen commits a crime, he does some of his sentence is commuted, and he's sent home, the analysis is, well, you get a better break. Foreigners get a better break from the criminal justice system than the United States citizens do. And I think we should start with the proposition that if you do the crime, you're going to do the time, no matter where you're from. And when you finish doing your time, away you go. Multi-pronged, coordinated efforts will be the key to protecting the community from being victimized by sex predators and other convicted criminals who go through a justice system revolving door. So let's just ruminate on this for a moment. We've got the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse. They changed the name of it, but I'm not going to bother about that. We've got that. We've got the Probation Division at the Superior Court. We've got the parole board on the other side. We've got the Department of Corrections. We've got detention facilities. We've got the cops. We have the sex criminal registry, etc. We got a lot of different parts. And as the editorial describes it, people aren't talking with one another. So it's as though we have six or seven separate machines running, not one coordinated with the other. So if that's the case, wouldn't you think that perhaps having a criminal justice czar, someone with enough juice to get all 6 or 7 of these people together, grab them all by the stack and swivel and crack their heads together and say, you folks, y'all going to have to start working together here. Okay, well, 10 more minutes and we'll be up to that big halftime show. So I'm going to finish up with this and pick up the card. I didn't quite finish with Schatz versus Guam yesterday, but I got a couple new ones. One is called Size Does Matter, and one is called MGV versus Gannett. So we'll pick that up after the big halftime break, which will occur in about 10 minutes. So get your popcorn ready. Get ready to enjoy yourself.
Let's go for a drive.
Let's take a stroll. Let's gallivant. Let's go cruising.
We all have different ways to describe how we get up and go in our cars. But whatever you may call it, you can do more of it when you save 6% off your fuel purchases at any Shell station when you use your eligible Bank of Guam Visa and MasterCard credit cards. So stop by any Guam or CNMI Shell station and start saving today. Visit bankofguam.com for more information. Terms and conditions apply. Bank of Guam, the People's Bank. Member FDIC.
Hi, welcome to the Subway ad for the new Sesame Ginger Glazed Chicken Signature Wrap. How would you like it?
I'll take a...
Sports announcer at home?
Yeah, how'd you...
We just know.
My wife picks up the new Signature Wrap. It's got double the rotisserie-style chicken mixed with a sesame ginger glaze. She appears annoyed at me, but she shrugs it off. Those sweet and savory flavors are calling her name. She lifts the wrap and... she takes the bite! Incredible! And now she's closing the door on my... Subway, make it what you want.
Limited time only at participating restaurants. Double meat based on average 6-inch sub.
So I'm hypothesizing a law enforcement czar that could pull all of these pieces together and make them work. Wait a minute. Didn't we have something like that in the Calvo administration?
Ray Tenorio.
Ray Tenorio.
Yes.
Yeah. I guess all of the stuff he did to pull these things together, once he left, it all probably fell apart, right?
I guess so.
Yeah.
Turned to dust.
What other explanation could there possibly be? Yeah. Well, here's how I see the problem. We have departments and we have directors and we have functions that need to be carried out. And none of what we have is the product of a long-range intensive planning process. The government of Guam just kind of grew. There was a time when we had a Department of Labor and Personnel that did all of the hiring and firing for the entire government. And we had a Department of Public Works that did all the custodial work for the entire government. Well, Labor and Personnel split into administration and finance, and then, we kept on breaking things up and putting them together. But no one ever sat down and figured out how these various parts should interact one with the other. So I'm going to take a crack at it. First of all, what should happen is that probation and parole should be combined into a separate standalone agency. That way, the work product of the probation officers slides easily into the hands of the parole board when it comes time to consider the parole of a particular inmate. The more you know about the inmate, the wiser decision you could make. The functions are roughly the same between probation and parole. Having the probation division under the judiciary, as far as I know, is kind of a one-off for Guam only, and it's not really a very good setup. The courts, in my mind, really should exist for one thing: providing tribunals that would reach fair and impartial decisions in civil and criminal matters in a reasonably expeditious fashion. Shouldn't be managing departments like probation. That should be an executive branch function, as should parole. So I would do that. I would move the detention facility away from the prison. Now, I know your common sense is, well, you know, they all deal with bars and locks and guards, and put them all together. No, it's not, because detention, pretrial detention, is a totally different animal from a prison. We have a Department of Corrections, and that's good because the corrections philosophy is appropriate for people that will get out of prison. And I've talked about this before. We want to do something with people when they're in a correction facility that give them something like a chance of not committing more crimes when they get out. But there are people in prison for life. They should not be mixed with those who are there for correction. So we should have a penitentiary as well as a correction facility. The building we have right now should be turned into a public park. Once again, it didn't start out as a well-planned institution, and it just grew and was added on to, and it makes no sense. It's not modern, it's labor-intensive, etc., and the location of it is poor. It shouldn't be smack dab in the middle of a residential area. So we need to have a separate correctional facility. We need to have a separate penitentiary, both of which should be in relatively isolated areas. We should have a detention facility, which should be downtown, close to the courts. We should have a single division for the Department of Probation and Parole. The Department of Probation and Parole could have its own psychologist, its own mental health workers, its own doctors, et cetera, et cetera. The other alternative would be to have mental health, the Department of Mental Health, the Department of Public Health, and the hospital have cells within their own compound to deal with people from the prison who need their services. I think the first alternative is better. But what we have right now is not a good situation. There was a time back in the 90s when the Department of Corrections had its own doctor and its own dentist, its own barber even. But those things apparently are not in place anymore. So what we need to do here is we need to hire an expert on the corrections business, and there are a lot of them out there. To have them come out here. If you could only need one person, have them come out here and do a design for our entire correction system, including the physical plant, the layout, the personnel structure, etc. Find the money and put all these things in place. Now, I've mentioned before, if you look through your political prism, there's no good politics in spending money on prisons. No one ever got elected to the Guam legislature because he spent a lot of money on the prison. The average citizen is saying, prison? Yeah. All you got to do is lock them up and throw the key away. Get them off the street. Which probably is not the best way to go about it. But until we grab that rather large bull by the horns, there's going to be a lot to talk about on Tall Tales as far as the shortfalls of how we deal with lawbreakers. Okay, big halftime show coming up. I'll be back in 6 or 7 minutes.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Trade talks take on new urgency. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. Chinese trade negotiators in Washington due to meet with U.S. trade representatives today for the 11th round of talks. If there is no deal, President Trump has threatened to impose new tariffs on $200 billion of Chinese imports just after midnight next. The president telling a rally last night in Florida.
They broke the deal. They can't do that, so they'll be paying. If we don't make the deal, nothing wrong with taking in over $100 billion a year.
China warning there'll be trade retaliation if the new tariffs are imposed. Asian stocks closing Thursday sharply lower. Dow futures down sharply, nearly 160 points lower as well. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has warned British Prime Minister Theresa May not to use Chinese telecommunications company Huawei to build Great Britain's new cellular network, saying if they do, the U.S. will be unable to share secret intelligence with London out of security concerns. At that Florida rally, the president also called for an end to what he called partisan investigations from Congress, only hours after the House Judiciary Committee voted to recommend Attorney General William Barr be held in contempt of Congress. Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler calling it a constitutional crisis.
There can be no higher stakes than this attempt to arrogate all power to the executive branch away from Congress and, more important, away from the American people.
Louisiana Republican Congressman Mike Johnson says it's anything but, pointing out the Democrats have not bothered to read a lightly redacted version of the report.
99.9% of the obstruction volume is available right now for the chairman to view, but he hasn't done that. Only 6 lines and over 182 pages is redacted in the obstruction volume. This is not about seeking the truth, as we've heard this morning. It's about raw partisan politics.
This is Fox News.
I'm Edward James Olmos, here to remind you that the second Saturday in May is the annual Letter Carrier Food Drive. The need for food assistance remains high in communities across America, but you can help. Simply leave a bag of non-perishable food near your mailbox on the second Saturday in May, and your letter carriers will do the rest. All food collected stays within your local community. So on the second Saturday in May, please join me and the National Association of Letter Carriers and stamp out hunger.
If you're driving, chances are you'll need gas soon. And by the growl in your tummy, a trip to the grocery store too. But don't just buy gas and groceries without getting double miles. Instead, apply for the new United credit card from First Hawaiian Bank and start earning double miles towards your next trip. Gas, groceries, getaway. With the new United credit card, apply at FHB.com. First Hawaiian Bank, member FDIC. Equal housing lender. Additional terms, conditions, and restrictions apply.
A member of the Trump family has been subpoenaed by a GOP-controlled Senate committee.
Fox News has confirmed that the Republican-led Senate Intelligence Committee has subpoenaed Donald Trump Jr. The subpoena is reportedly over remarks he made regarding a proposed Trump Tower in Moscow while testifying before the Senate Judiciary Committee back in 2017. The subpoena is significant because it could not have been issued without the approval of the committee's Republican chairman, Richard Burr. A source close to the president's son tells Fox News Trump Jr. has already been cleared by special counsel Robert Mueller, adding, quote, "No lawyer would ever agree to allow their client to participate in what is an obvious PR stunt." In Washington, Sean Lanchel, Fox News.
Both suspects in Tuesday's Colorado school shooting have appeared in court. The 16-year-old being held on suspicion of murder and attempted murder charges is due back in court on Friday. The 18-year-old facing charges including murder for the death of 18-year-old student Kendrick Castillo, who tried to subdue the shooter. According to Kendrick's dad, John,
Kendrick and another boy chased them out of the door and into the hallway and tackled them. He was the one who took the fire first because he was the first one there, you know, as he was tackling them. And that's what I've been told.
John Castillo said he's also told his son that he didn't have to be a hero, but his son said, "No, Dad, that's how you raised me." In the wake of the Parkland shooting in Florida, Florida's governor has signed a bill allowing for more armed school teachers, allowing any teacher to volunteer to be armed if the local school districts approve. They'll have to undergo police-style training and get a psychiatric evaluation. President Trump endorsed arming teachers during a listening session with relatives of the Parkland shooting victims last year. Andrew Pollack made an impassioned plea for action.
I'm pissed because my daughter I'm not going to see again.
17 people were killed in that shooting on Valentine's Day last year. I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
Business travel just got easier. Take your data plan with you for only $10 a day to all 17 Data to Go destinations. Never worry about additional data roaming charges when you go where your business needs you. The US, China, Thailand, and so much more. Have the assurance you need to check emails, surf the web, and stay connected. Call 688-2677 today to make sure your account is Data to Go ready. Docomo Pacific. Better together.
You came to celebrate something for Mom, and it turns into a family reunion. Mom deserves a night off from cooking, and what you found is a moment worth savoring. Create more moments to savor with Mom for Mother's Day at Chili's. Mom can choose from the ancho salmon or the classic sirloin and complete it with a beverage and the paradise pie. Chocolate chip, walnut, and coconut layered bar topped with vanilla ice cream and drizzled with hot fudge and caramel. There are a million reasons to Chili's. Make this one be about Mom. Chili's, savor the moment.
Well, I've got my work cut out for me this afternoon. I actually have to make a judgment as to which of the editorials gets the blue star, since I actually have two editorials in front of me today. So I take a look at the Daily News. Well, let me start out by saying that both papers made their cases fairly well, although the Post had a couple of errors. But both made their cases fairly well. So I think this is going to turn on the call to action and the respective editorials. This is what the Daily News says. We need the governor and senators to step up and act to fill the position quickly. That's the medical examiner position. If that means Governor Lulian Guerrero needs to declare a state of emergency and senators need to increase the salary and benefits to attract a suitable candidate, then so be it. And elected officials need to immediately find a funding source for the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner so it can make use of the services of daughtermen and the contracted Hawaii pathologists. Well, good call to action. No doubt as to what the Daily News is urging and who they are urging. So that's what we look for in a good editorial. So much for the Daily News. Let's see how the Post handled it. And they get stuck on their own error. It's one thing for our justice system to be overwhelmed by prisoners and parolees whose home is Guam. It's another issue for Guam to be forced to continue to provide services to convicts who broke the law and must, also by law, be kicked out of here. If the government and agencies in charge of dealing with these problems aren't overwhelmed by the massive number of convicts in our prison system, then they will be able to better focus on resources they will be provided with for a smaller prison and parolee population. No. No. It's true that these agencies need more money to do their job right. It's also right to remove the burdens on the system that should no longer be Guam's problem to deal with. I've said before, you don't necessarily have to sing my tune in order to get the blue star. It helps, but you can't be way off base either, and that's where the Post is with this call to action. Multi-pronged, coordinated efforts will be key to protecting the community from being victimized by sex predators and other convicted criminals who go through a justice system go through a justice system revolving door. I don't know. It wasn't a very hard decision today. Put this back here. You don't need the drum roll today, Real Joe Cruz. Daily News gets it. There it is, the Daily News. I think the Daily News has gone up above 40. Let me just check my score sheet here. They got an F on the 6th of May. Yeah, the Daily News is now up to 41. Keep up the good work, PDN. Competition brings out the best in everyone. Okay, now let me go to the card. Now, yesterday I had an item here. Well, before I do that, I think I'll cruise through the Facebook posts here, welcome some people back.
Welcome back.
Yeah, well, Brad Hewitt, welcome back. Brad, as usual, is locked and loaded. Ishmael Velez, almost always first or second to sign in to Tall Tales. I appreciate that, Ishmael. And we got a Tom Van Ingen. He's ready for class on time today. Bob and Real Joe. Wow. Another member of the cult of the Real Joe Cruz personality. And he's followed by another Tom Tahaji. And then we've got Nate horning in. Nate has some data, some calendar information for us. He says that tomorrow is Friday. Yeah, we hate that, don't we, Real Joe Cruz? That means we got to go 2 whole days with no Tall Tales. Yeah, it's tough, but we somehow make it every weekend. We come back bright-eyed and bushy-tailed on Monday, don't we, Real Joe Cruz? Okay, then I've got Brad Hewitt again, but Bob, GPD is waiting on the Attorney General's office to formally charge this character. Probably true, although that isn't the way it ordinarily works. And then we've got Lee Stolley, afternoon judge, afternoon Lee. And then a question from Lee Stolley. Still salty? Yeah. Is the ocean still salty? And Jesse Limtiaco, a member of the Triple J Rangers, right of the people to bear arms should not be infringed. Ha ha. Okay. Joe Cruz. Oh, this is not you, Joe. This is not the real Joe Cruz. This is another Joe Cruz. And he, again, I'll repeat it. A guy can't even go on administrative leave in the comfort of his own home without Bob blowing a gasket and salt leaking out. Boy, that Bob. He needs tighter fitting gaskets, right? Kenny Williams, scandal, cover-up, conspiracy theories, hoping we'll forget. Uh-huh. And then Pierre says Guam does not have guns in the parking lot laws. Okay. Employers have the right to limit the possession of guns in the workplace, but jurisprudence is less clear about guns left, quote, unsecured in a vehicle in the parking lot. Well, I'd say it wouldn't be jurisprudence so much as statutes, the way a statute is written. Pierre says actually the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled in favor of employees in 3 cases in the last 10 years. The devil being in the details. The issue is can a parking lot be part of the workplace? And my answer to that is depends on how the statute is drawn. Okay. And we go on here to lost my place there for a second. Okay, here I am. Richard V. Leone. Bob, you can rattle Second Amendment. There are other amendments. Guam suffers numerous social injustice. School employee violates the law. Estumbo dead man and no one identified. Customs agent had his gun incident because he's related to Sinactress. Guam public should all have guns because you're Second Amendment oriented. Well, anybody who wants one, who is eligible, should have one. I agree. Richard V. Leone. The AG thinks the medical examiner issue is not important. And then Richard also says former ex-goober has to be investigated for lying. Brad Hewitt. Hate that word client. Yeah, well, I've got, when I get to it, I've got something here from Confucius called the Doctrine of Names. And Confucius says, and he says it quite elaborately, if we're going to have justice and things that work right, we've got to call things by the right name. And I really agree with them when they say that. Brad Hewitt, that was a stupid law to begin with, talking about castration. You definitely tell that little young socialist female that worked in Brad McCready's office is the one who came up with that brilliant idea and pushed it onto him. I don't know who the young socialist female in Brad McCready's office was. Probably never will. But here's a little known fact about the term of the senatorial career of Brad McCready. He set the record. He has done something that no one else in the history of Guam has ever done. He ran for re-election and finished dead last. 30 candidates. When the votes were counted, Brant finished number 30. Yeah. And you know, when he first started, I thought maybe he could be a contender. You don't know what the name of his business was, do you, Real Joe Cruz?
Contenders.
Contenders Jim, yeah. I thought maybe he could be a contender. Richard Leone says, repeal that castration law. It's more a campaign ploy than legitimate. No funds, no doctors. The senators knew this. Well, I suspect that the thing that would stand in the way of any senator introducing a bill to repeal the castration law would be the voice of a certain veterinary doctor who has come out and spoken in favor of it, and quite persuasively, I might add. It's like so many other things, though, that enacting statutes that look really good on paper is only part of the process. There's an old saying that people are policy. So if you've got somebody who would be more comfortable being a stand-up comedian than a director of corrections in charge of the prison out there, then the fact that something's on the books doesn't mean it's going to happen. The reason these things happen is because people who are in authority chase them down. They make things happen. Things just don't happen by accident. The fact that the statute is enacted, the director of corrections then would have had to make sure that he had money in his budget for both the doctor and the whatever chemicals you need for the castration. But if the director only sits back and says, oh, I don't have the money for that, then no, it's not going to happen. That's why when governors appoint people to these positions, it's so important. And when people come up for their confirmation hearing, same thing, although it's really hard to fail for confirmation unless you angered Mary Torres. Then it's relatively easy. Okay, going on past castration. There are a lot of unenforceable laws that need to be repealed. Well, if they're unenforceable, yeah. If they're unenforced, maybe not. And then Brad Hewitt says, oh boy, another case of the shats. So I wonder if another Joe Cruz, come the next election, is going to make a contribution to Representative Schatz from Hawaii. Probably wouldn't do it on the 5th of May, right? Brad Hewitt, law enforcement czar. If Rodriguez was in office, he would have made this a real success. Systems approach. Well, maybe so. I wonder how many people now already have buyer's remorse with our first female governor of Guam. Richard V. Leon, the Guam public notes that GovGuam has titles without true purpose. And Brad comes back, jail versus corrections versus prison, all of which have a definite meaning, but which we don't use correctly. Richard V. Leon, put convicts on Pagan Island for all the Marianas. You know, Ricky Berdallo had the idea that we should create a prison on Goat Island. Goat Island is that small island just south of Tinian. He figured it'd be escape-proof. And it's kind of the approach that the French used with what is actually not properly named Devil's Island. There were 3 islands off the coast of French Guiana that the French used for its French convicts. Hard to escape from, and actually the prisoners actually lived in kind of a subsistence economy. They built their own dwellings, they raised their own food, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But given the way things work nowadays, the cost of bringing prisoners back and forth from Goat Island to the courts, to doctors, to dentists, whatever, and the difficulty in allowing for visitation would make Goat Island extremely expensive. And I know people out there are saying, don't let them have any, they don't need to have any visitors, lock them up, throw the key away. But I can tell you the access to visitors is really important for the prison. A director of corrections has several concerns. One is obviously no escapes. Second is order maintenance, how to keep things in the prison under control. Third is idleness reduction. The busier the inmates are, the less trouble they're going to get into. So given the way things work nowadays, it's a system of carrots and sticks. And one of the hardest carrots that a director of corrections has is to say, no visitation for you for the next day, week, month, year, whatever. So visitation is extremely important. Another aspect of it is that when inmates are allowed to stay in contact with their families, there's a better chance that when they get out of prison, they've got a better chance of going straight. Anyhow, back to Facebook here. I hear what you're saying, Richard, about Pagan Island, but I don't know. Brad Hewitt, how about privatizing the joint? Have a private company come in, build it, maintain it, and the prison population. Well, that's been tried in a lot of jurisdictions. There's a company called Corrections Corporation of America. It might even trade on the big board. It's been a pretty profitable company, but it's had its share of problems. And I've spoken before, I'm all for privatizing the proprietary functions of the government. I'm not in favor of privatizing the governmental functions of the government. Fire, police, corrections, those are governmental functions. Water, power, those are proprietary functions. Even the hospital, proprietary function. I don't have any problem privatizing those, but I don't know about police, fire, corrections, if that's a good idea. There's been a fair amount of scandal in the private prison business in addition. Brad goes on to say, unfortunately, Wackenhut is G4S. Don't know those guys taking care of their pari in prison. But there are other good private prison outfits. Yeah, like Corrections Corporation of America is probably the most famous. And then another Joe Cruz. This isn't you, right? It's a part of the Triple J Rangers. How about P&B prison and breakfast? It's like Airbnb, but people can host prisoners in their homes for a fee. We could tax it. Yeah. Yeah, and I expect the Triple J Rangers would be the first folks that would sign up for that one, right? Sherry Iriarty, that's a name I don't remember seeing before. Welcome aboard, Sherry. She says, this isn't right. It should be corrected. I think she's probably talking about the situation described in the Post editorial. Nate, Nate is horning out. He said he's logging out. Good night, all. Good night, Nate. Glad you could join us. And then Brad Hewitt says, Ricky Orsini, who I guess was a socialist female that goaded Brant McCready into the castration bill. I don't know. Then I've got Brad Hewitt, who says that's called the Schatz list. I guess Brad must have some interest in Hawaii politics if he's following Brian Schatz so closely. I'm not going to ask him what he did on Cinco de Mayo. Okay, that's the whole Facebook roster that I just went through. I'm glad you signed up. And by the way, while you're looking at your screen, up there you see that thumb where it says like. How about clicking on that and tipping off all your friends to what a great place Tall Tales is at this time in the afternoon? I'd appreciate it. They'd appreciate it. Probably Mr. Facebook would appreciate it. Okay, so looking at the card here, I started yesterday with Mitch McConnell versus marijuana, and there was a four-letter word that might, according to the article I read, might stand in the way of the legalization, the federal legalization of marijuana. You remember that four-letter word, Real Joe Cruz? Can you spell it?
HEMP.
Wow. Very good.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, and then I had Diane Pappas versus testicles. We needn't go into that one. And then I had Schatz versus Guam, and that's where another Joe Cruz came along and shared his rather sad Cinco de Mayo experience with us on that one. And that takes us down to a new piece for today, and it's called Size Does Matter. And this is by Michael Bavacqua. I've got a whole raft of stuff dealing with Michael Bavacqua that I never get to. I don't think I'll get to it today, probably tomorrow. But Michael Bavacqua says, last week the United Nations Committee of 24, and if he were listening, our Carl could give you an earful about the Committee of 24. That's countries like Iran, China, some of the most tyrannical regimes in the world that constitute the United Nations Decolonization Committee. The Committee on 24 held its regional seminar on Grenada. I was invited to attend as an expert. Wow. I wonder who paid for his trip. I have a feeling I know. An expert and testify about the state of affairs on the island. Now, you recall that I have renamed what is euphemistically referred to as the Commission on Decolonization as the Chamorro Independence Commission, because that commission has nothing to do with decolonization. They have not taken one step towards moving Guam away from a colonial status. Not one step. Okay, I got to take... are we going to look for Jack Haddock today? No, I guess not. Okay, 7th inning stretch. Jack, you're on your own.
2-for-1 dinner time is back at Ruby Tuesday Guam. That's 2 fresh garden bars, 2 tasty entrees, and a sweet dessert to share for just $25.99. 2-for-1 dinner time for a limited time at Ruby Tuesday Guam.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
It was my first official job, and it was dark and cold. And all I could think about was, what was I thinking about being out here and doing this? I'm Jerry Roberts, and at 7:20 a.m. on The Ray Gibson Show, let's talk about business lessons learned at a young age.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts. Brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
So here we are, center field bleachers, Wrigley Field. I look around, I don't see anybody I know out here at all, out here in the bleachers. Well, tomorrow is another day. Okay, going back to Size Does Matter by Michael Bavacqua. He talks about he went to the committee, United Nations Committee on 24 as an expert to testify about the state of affairs on the island. Now, Michael is an unavowed, unapologetic proponent of independence for the island of Guam. He's never told us what an independent Guam would look like. He just, well, we should just be independent. Which allows me to speculate what an independent Guam would look like if Michael Bavacqua had a role in molding it. And what I would suspect to be seeing would be the Socialist Chamorro Republic of Guam. That's what I would expect to see. And, you know, everybody likes to throw around the colonial vocabulary. You know, the worst thing, the possible thing you can say about someone is he's a colonizer. Yeah. And we've talked about that before, that, you know, the colonizer. And every problem that we have here on Guam is blamed on the colonizer. So if we're really going to embrace this vocabulary, I would throw out a couple of pretty good words here. The first one would be pied noir, which is a French word. It has a strange translation, black feet, but it doesn't mean black feet at all. It refers to the people from France, Frenchmen who had settled and were enjoying life in the privacy of their own homes in French Algeria for several generations. And when Algeria became independent, the pied noir got, you know, flooded the docks to get out of France, get out of Algeria while there was still time, because it wasn't safe. And without going through a laundry list, you see this happening in an awful lot of former colonies. Southern Rhodesia under Robert Mugabe. South Africa was never a colony, but they're going through that right now. So I don't know how comfortable I would be in the Socialist Chamorro Republic of Guam with perhaps Commissar Michael Bavacqua. I don't think I would be very comfortable. And no, he has never come out and said, this is what we aim for as an independent country. It's just, well, independence, that's it. Another item in the vocabulary is, if you really want to talk colonialism, is the word quisling. Quisling, quisling. That's a word that came from Norway. And there was a person in Norway called Vidkun Quisling who always wanted to be the premier or prime minister of Norway. I can't remember which one it is. So when the Germans occupied Norway, Quisling made up with them really quick. He was a sympathizer to start with. He got on the right side real quick. And he was a collaborator and ran the country for the invading Germans. So a quisling, that's what describes a quisling. So people that are elected to positions in the colonizer's government, which means the government of Guam, maybe even the University of Guam, because these are all creatures of the colonizer. If we're going to really be strictly applying this vocabulary, do we need to use the Q word here also? I don't see anybody talking about that. I certainly don't see Michael Bavacqua talking about such things, although he's pretty free with his use of the word the colonizer. Melvin Wanpad Borja, who is another independentista, the recently appointed executive director for the Commission on Decolonization, also attended, representing Governor Lou Leon Guerrero. I'd sure like to know who paid for Melvin's ticket to Grenada. It's a pretty expensive trip from here to the Caribbean. And of course, the situation that expert Bavacqua is going to talk about is the fact that no one on Guam is tripping over, I would ordinarily say himself, but I better say themselves, to bring about an independent Guam, which is horrible. And there's been criticism by other interests about the commission as being only a commission for independence, not for statehood, not for free association. And I think the criticism is warranted, because that's what the commission is. It's the commission for Chamorro independence. If you like it, well, then you got something good. If you don't like it, not so hot. I once again, though, go along with the idea, if we're talking decolonization, that's what we should be talking about. Let's not camouflage what we're really trying to do. Going on, the Committee of 24 is responsible for overseeing the UN list of non-self-governing territories, the colonies that remain in the world. The list has 17, most of which are in the Caribbean and Pacific. At the seminar, the head of state for each non-self-governing territory and a group of experts are invited to testify and provide updates. Well, how can a non-self-governing territory have a head of state? Kind of inconsistent. The administering powers for each territory are invited, although few rarely do. I guess he wants to say a few rarely do show up. The United States is the colonizer. Whoa! The United States is the colonizer for 3 current non-self-governing territories. The next thing, I would expect someday I'm going to walk out of this studio and I'm going to see those powder blue tanks rolling down the street with the UN peacekeeping force coming aboard the island here to make sure that Guam can become independent. The United States is the colonizer for 3 current non-self-governing territories: Guam, American Samoa, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. The U.S. is never there. The reason for their lack of participation is obvious. Well, As far as American Samoa and the U.S. Virgin Islands, as far as I know, from what I've read, both of those islands are satisfied with where they are now. We had a former governor from the Virgin Islands come out here, and I think they've tried four hacks at trying to enact a constitution. Were never able to do it. And they said that their major emphasis is trying to make the best of their relationship with the United States. American Samoa, absolutely. They like it right where they are. So I guess the question becomes, what do you do with people who don't want to be decolonized? You just kind of force them whether they want to or not, all in the name of self-determination. The U.S. is never there. The reason for their lack of participation is obvious. I would have thought that if you said the U.S., you'd say the lack of its participation is obvious. But I guess nowadays the word "there" is the default pronoun. The U.S. has argued decolonization is an internal matter, and the UN has no right to interfere. It also argues decolonization is what the U.S. wants to do with Guam and has nothing to do with what the people in Guam, Chamorro or otherwise, want. For those seeking examples of greatness or high ideals, U.S. policy on the territories is the last place to look. I'd probably want to look at the Bavaqua's columns first. The regional seminar represents an important venue for those who remain fundamentally cut off from the world by colonialism. Now, people who live on Guam are fundamentally cut off from the world. There's just no question about it. People from Guam, don't have valid passports. They can't go anywhere. No access to media. Free speech? Absolutely not. Fundamentally cut off from the world by colonialism to speak to others and make their case for the future. Well, who are you making your case to there, Dr. Bavacqua? At this seminar, representatives of 9 of the 17 non-self territories attended. I guess the other 8 just didn't care. And you've got Bermuda, British Virgin Islands, U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, Montserrat, French Polynesia, Gibraltar, the Falkland Islands, and Western Samoa. Well, going through that list, I have a feeling that Bermuda is not that interested in changing its status. The strength of Bermuda is that it is a British colony with a very well-developed set of banking laws. It's been in the offshore banking business ever since. If it were an independent country, small as it is, I don't think that's a legitimate possibility. Then you've got the British Virgin Islands, some of the same thing. U.S. Virgin Islands, I talked about. Guam, Montserrat, French Polynesia. French Polynesia is actually an integral part of France. I wonder what they're even doing on the list. Gibraltar. I can imagine an independent Gibraltar. Gibraltar is so small. Gibraltar is a very interesting place. It's been British since, I think, 1812. And it's on top of the so-called Rock of Gibraltar, right at the entrance of the channel between the Mediterranean and the Atlantic, the so-called Pillars of Hercules. And it's been an extremely strategic location forever. And the Brits have held on to it. And the Spanish say that the British should give it back, that it's really Spanish territory, and the British have no right to stay there at all. And the British have conducted a plebiscite. The Gibraltarians, that is those of the Spanish ancestry who call Gibraltar home, don't want it. They want to stay the way they are. They want to remain a British colony. They don't want to be part of Spain. But, you know, Committee of 24, decolonization, etc. Maybe they're going to have to, whether they want to or not. Falkland Islands. I have a feeling that there's not much sentiment in the Falkland Islands. Small islands in the South Atlantic off the coast of Argentina that the Brits and Argentina fought a war over about 30 years ago. I don't think those folks want to be independent. Western Sahara, no comment. Most of these colonies are islands, some of them smaller than Guam in terms of size, population, and economy. One of the most fascinating things about traveling to the Caribbean, on somebody else's nickel, I didn't say that, that's not what the editorial said, is that independent island nations are the norm, not an exception. We in Guam often see being independent as being the U.S. The way we see countries is defined by the U.S. economy, military, government, etc. It's easy to forget the U.S. is just one of close to 200 independent nations, every one of which would be a more desirable place to live than here. I added, if we imagine our possibilities through the U.S. model, it's very limiting. It limits our understanding of what and who is out there, and also the limits of our understanding of ourselves. While flying to Grenada, I had a long conversation with one of the flight attendants who lived in the West Indies. Isn't that a colonialist term, the West Indies? I think it is. I think that's a remnant of colonialism. She had no idea what Guam was. I told her about Guam's size and population, and she surprised me by saying, wow, such a large island, so many people. We are used to thinking ourselves as being small and that we can't do much, but there are dozens of nations smaller than Guam in the world doing what they can to determine their destiny. That's it, determine their destiny. So maybe what we ought to do is bring that flight attendant out here to start a lecture series to help us think about determining our destiny. Pretty much the usual cultural Marxist pap from Mr. Bavacqua. Okay, going on to the next item on the card. This is MNG versus Gannett. And it's something that came from today's PDN. And it says business news, and it comes from Nathan Bomey from USA Today. Shareholder advisory firm backs Gannett in takeover fight. Now, when I saw that, I thought, wow, is the Post attempting to take over the Daily News? I hope. A shareholder advisory service sided with Gannett in its effort to fend off the hostile takeover attempt of a hedge fund-controlled newspaper company. Glass Lewis, which advises shareholders on governance issues, recommended that Gannett shareholders reject the unsolicited bid and board nominees from MNG Enterprises. Glass Lewis on Tuesday released a report casting serious doubt about the credibility of MNG's offer to acquire Gannett for $12 per share, saying that Gannett's current team has performed ably in spite of major challenges to the media industry. Okay, and then there's a little information about Gannett owning 100 other publications. MNG owns the Denver Post, San Francisco Mercury News, etc. And then the story doesn't really tell you much at all. So then I dug around a little bit, and I found a story from the New York Post. Not the same thing as the Guam Post, but it says, war raging between Gannett Board and MNG amid hostile takeover bid. You didn't find this, of course, in the Daily News. All-out war is raging between the Gannett board and Alden Global-backed MNG Enterprises, which is trying to pull off a hostile $1.36 billion takeover bid of the USA Today publisher. Institutional Shareholder Services, a proxy analysis firm, partially weighed in on the side of the Alden MNG bid, urging Gannett shareholders to vote to put Steve Rossi, one of the Alden-backed candidates, on the Gannett board. ISED said the $12 a share offer would provide an exit at a premium price to historic valuations from a company that has thus far been unable to realize profitable growth in its ongoing multi-year digital transformation. There's another article that I found yesterday that's titled, this one comes from, okay, I'm going to come back and I'm going to wrap this. I'm going to take a peek at the Facebook, and then I'm going to wrap this up, and it'll be the end of another perfect day here on Tall Tales.
Legends aren't born, they are made. And during our Jeep Celebration event at Cars Plus and Mighty, you'll receive up to $6,000 in accessories with the purchase of a new Jeep Wrangler, Motor Trend SUV of the Year. Customize your new Jeep to the way you want it. Or how about a new Jeep Grand Cherokee? Save up to $5,000. Or save up to $7,500 on a new Jeep Compass Sport. It's our Jeep Celebration event going on now at Cars Plus and Mighty. Cars Plus, driven by you. Accessory special cannot be combined with other offers. See dealer for details.
Experience the Take Care difference. Take Care members can count on accessing a high-quality, credentialed network of on-island providers, including the convenient one-stop FHP Health Center and Urgent Care, access to an extensive off-island network of providers, and the island's largest offering of free fitness classes and health education programs. You can count on Take Care to deliver comprehensive, accredited insurance coverage and quality health care when and where you need it. Take Care. Our island, your health plan. Learn more at takecareasia.com.
In an article that I found in a publication called Biz Journal, the president of Gannett, a guy named Dickey, has retired. So right now Gannett has no president. They're looking around for a president. And to further the story about the takeover and the company that wants to take over Gannett, MNG, Gannett insists that all of MNG-backed candidates face conflicts of interest. Meanwhile, the News Guild Union once again ripped Alden MNG and Digital First Media, as the publisher is also known as a, quote, destroyer of newspapers, and called for protests at Gannett-owned Detroit Free Press and at DFM-owned Detroit News and Denver Post on Friday. Alden is a hedge fund known for taking over companies, selling their assets, and leaving the companies in ruins, said a News Guild spokesman. Well, it's pretty interesting. I think this is all really interesting. And I guess the only way that we're going to be able to find out more about it, except for cruising around the internet, is if the Post decides to cover it, because it doesn't look like the Daily News is going to. Okay, so much for that. Pretty much finished up the card here today. Not quite. I didn't get to Fernandez versus Wanpad. Well, I'll do that tomorrow. And I'm going to take a peek at some of the more provocative comments here on the internet. Here's one of the Triple J Rangers. So, Mr. K, you are okay with colonialism. If it's a question, it would read this way: are you okay with colonialism? And I've gone into this on more than one occasion. Statehood is not a possibility. Free association is a will-o'-the-wisp. And independence, for all the reasons I mentioned, is not something that I can warm up to at all. I think that I've maintained this for a long time, that the United States is an imperial power. It has been since the Spanish-American War. We are now part of perhaps the greatest empire in the world. I think we'd be better off trying to make the best of our situation in that empire than chasing something called anti- or decolonization when we don't know where it's going to go. So I don't like to get into discussions where the first person who applies the label can claim victory. But given what I said, I think where we are right now is very, very good. And I don't see that there's any change that we can make in our situation that's going to be better for the people that live here. I think that there are ways that we could enhance our situation. But if I had to answer yes or no to a properly worded question, so Mr. K, are you okay with colonialism for Guam? My answer would be yes. Okay, then we go on to Pierre. The commission, the committee was created by the Soviets during the Cold War. No wonder Psycho Van Bavacqua feels at ease participating in such an environment. Jesse Limtiaco, Chamorro self-determination is something the people of Guam deserve. Well, you know, I deserve a lot of stuff too. So it's kind of demurrable. One person thinks that he deserves something. That's interesting, but hardly conclusive. Going on to, and Pierre corrects me on my history again. Gibraltar was ceded to Great Britain in 1713 after the War of Spanish Succession. Sherry Iriarte, why is the U.S. considered a colonizer, but Spain is never mentioned as one? I guess probably because it's a little hard to grind an axe with respect to the Spanish colonial era, although it certainly had an impact on Guam. And I think that as far as a colonial regime is concerned, the Spanish colonial regime really wasn't anywhere near as people-centered as the American colonial regime. I think that's the reason there is this tendency to find issues that allow people to climb on their soapboxes and complain. Pretty far removed from Spain. So that's it for today. The Real Joe Cruz and I will be back tomorrow for the last episode of Tall Tales this week. So make sure you've got your tickets. Make sure you arrive early so you can get a good seat. We'll see you tomorrow.